Hello, I'm Lucy. It's just as well I proposed to do this from my home before I looked at photographs of Port Macquarie. Wow, what a place. Waterways, rainforests, beaches. Well, here's a bit of sun setting over South London. Debbie asked me to speak about resourcefulness, relevance and resilience in responding to the great challenges of our time, living within the ecological limits of a finite planet. I've got some notes and I'm going to speak about work I've been doing on sustainable ability in the arts and cultural sector, and in particular about the Happy Museum, looking at how the gallery and museum sector can transition to a high well-being, sustainable future. Before I do that, I must thank three people who've helped me be resourceful and resilient and stepping into the breach to help me do this. Firstly, my husband, Simon Maggs, to help set up the technology for this wizardry. And secondly, a long-term friend and colleague, Angharad Wyn-Jones, who has stepped in to be with you in my stead. And thirdly, the person who I don't know who is pushing the buttons on my slides right now. Thank you. I'd love to be with you this week, and with a sense of loss, I acknowledge that. I've been to Australia twice in my life as director of the London International Festival of Theatre, and I adore the place. I absolutely adore the place. But I questioned my role as a voice in this important debate if I were to blow my year's carbon on a return flight to Australia. It's either important to look these matters in the eye, or it isn't. And I think it is. So with Debbie and Cassie, we decided to experiment in a relocalisation of communicating about arts and culture while maintaining this global dimension. We really don't want to feel the world is closing down as we undertake new ways of connecting to each other, rather opening out in new and wonderful ways. I'm convinced positive and meaningful experiences will flow from experiments such as these, trusting and working closely with each other as we have been doing to prepare for today. In a clear-eyed way, we must work together to insist that our sector is vital to the public's imagination and a vision of a possible, viable, sustainable future. A bit about my background. I worked for 25 years at the London International Festival of Theatre. Angharad was my successor, so there you understand the connection. The experience was foundational for me in understanding story, people and place, and how the arts can nurture and provoke change worldwide. I had my Gaia moment in 2006 on a course at Schumacher College, and began to question the role of the arts and culture in responding to our astonishing environmental predicament. Drawn to positive action, I came across Transition Towns, a fast-growing social change movement, and I'll speak about that later, modelling change in how we live, where we live. I found parallels working in the arts and Transition Towns. They both involve working with the imagination and facilitating creative processes within the public realm. The first step in creating a more positive future is collectively to imagine it. Much of my learning in this field has come from that simple truth. It's useful, I hope, to remind ourselves exactly of the global context we're working in. I show how I'll explain the carousel of challenges to myself, to my colleagues and to my family. You'll know it all already. It's information we have to take ownership of and make our own. So, we're all connected. Here I am on one side of the planet. Yep, it's cold, we've lit a fire, and there you are all on the other side with sunshine and beaches. This image is known as the Blue Marble. Taken in 1968, it's the first picture taken of Earth from space. One of the most widely reproduced images in history. It represents the first time we were confronted with the isolation, frailty and vulnerability of the planet, afloat amidst an expanse of space. We went to the moon, but discovered our home, the Earth. It's the moment Al Gore credits with the start of the modern environmental movement. Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace were set up within 2 years, and the first UN summit on the environment was 2 years after that. 40 years on, with decades of protesting, campaigning and concern behind us, and accepted scientific evidence of climate change, environmental degradation and resource depletion, the societal response to global environmental challenges has yet to find adequate solutions for living together within ecological limits of a finite planet. We know we exist on a finite planet, but many, including governments and businesses, cling to the unsustainable concept of infinite growth. So where are we in 2011? The Earth is 4 billion years old, and we're moving from the Holocene into the Anthropocene era, in which humans are having a significant impact on the environment. And that's at the edge of the drawing. That's exactly where we are. This diagram from the Stockholm Resilience Institute in 2009 shows the state of the Earth and asks, what are the planetary boundaries we face? What are the key systems we need to remain stable in order to live as a species and, importantly, for other species to live as well? And they came up with these 9. And of those 9, 3 are in the danger area already. Climate change, the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, and biodiversity. And cripes, the suggestion climate change could be the easiest to deal with. Infinite growth on a finite planet is simply not possible. You'll be familiar with pictures like this, showing how many planets our current ways of overconsumption demand. We're using the equivalent of 135% of our planet's resources a year, or overshooting what the Earth is able to regenerate. We're not doing well in the UK, as you can see, and I don't know what the statistics for where Australia fits into this. Our current model of economic growth, which has encouraged our overconsumption, is broken, and we are waking up to that. And we're faced with a huge shift in resource availability. This shows miners in the USA in the late 1800s with a nugget of copper they found lying around. And the Bingham Canyon copper mine in Utah, look at the efforts involved in looking for copper today. And it's not just because they like digging big holes. One resource which may be reaching its peak is cheap and easily accessible oil. This energy-rich resource is fundamental to so much of our lives for transport, power, plastics, fertilizers, medicines, food productions, and yes, cultural activity too. Dr. Fatih Birol, chief economist of the International Energy Agency, believes the public and many governments appear to be oblivious to the fact that the oil on which modern civilization depends is running out far faster than previously predicted, and that global production is likely to peak in about 10 years, at least a decade earlier than most governments had estimated. That was 2 years ago. But despite economic growth, our general well-being is declining and inequality is rising. This is a favela alongside wealthy developments in Brazil. We're familiar with these contrasts in our own communities. 25% of the world's population receives 75% of the wealth, and such inequality fuels conflict, mass migration, poverty, and many other social problems. You might have heard of the riots that took place in the UK this summer, and possibly also of the spirited occupations taking place on Wall Street, the City of London, elsewhere. In the spirit level, research is brought together to show the health of how our democracies, our societies and their people are dependent entirely on greater equality. So, to look at a sustainable future. This is the Brundtland Commission's definition of sustainability: meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. A shift of consciousness is needed, recognising the limits of our planet with a focus on a fair distribution of resources to meet both our current and our future needs. Does such a shift of consciousness seem possible? Humans are a remarkable and ingenious species, capable of understanding the structures of atoms and the immensity of space. We travel to the moon using the same computer power of the mobile phone in our pocket. There's evidence of our capability to respond to these challenges. The good news is that there are many people working on models to solve these problems, models already in operation and standing ready for wider application. In the UK, there are technical models such as Zero Carbon Britain, produced by the Centre for Alternative Technology in 1977 and recently updated. It sets out a realistic policy framework in Britain for how we could eliminate emissions from fossil fuels within 20 years in housing, transport and business, using applications of solutions already in existence. And with the scope for solar and renewable energy, is there something like this in Australia? There are economic models. The New Economics Foundation's Great Transition provides a comprehensive blueprint for building an economy based on stability, sustainability and equality, with success measured in terms of human and planetary well-being rather than monetary growth. This thinking is beginning to seep into the mainstream. There are community solutions, such as the Transition Town movement, which evolved in the UK and has spread virally worldwide with hundreds and hundreds of initiatives, from Totnes to Tooting and beyond. You have several initiatives in New South Wales, not so far away, in Newcastle and Sydney to the south, Armidale to the west, and Bellingham to the north. I really hope it's possible for you to connect to them. Maybe you already have. Transition towns engage communities in planning for a local transition to a sustainable future, creating a positive vision of where we want to be and backcasting from there. It's a very inspiring practice. All three approaches are informed by the belief that a sustainable future has the potential to be preferable to the present, healthier, happier, more resilient, localised and more collaborative. They recognise the true source of our well-being lies not in our consumption, but in our connections and relationships with each other and to the earth on which we live. It's something Tim Flannery, in his brilliant book Here on Earth, also argues. We are a collaborative species. There's hope. On the subject of well-being, the New Economics Foundation was commissioned by the UK government's Foresight project on mental capital and well-being in 2008 to review the interdisciplinary work of 400 scientists from across the world. The aim was to identify a set of evidence-based actions to improve well-being, which individuals would be encouraged to build into their daily lives. They synthesised findings into 5 ways of well-being, and they lie in our capacity to connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. Some cities, such as Liverpool, here in the UK, have based their entire regeneration around these 5 ways. And so what is the response of our own sector in the arts and culture? I know from the work on greening the arts, which Angharad will tell you more about, Australia is burgeoning with examples of creative, resourceful responses, such as those at Musica Viva in Surrey Hills, Carriage Works in Eveleigh, and Sydney's Museum of Contemporary Arts. In 2010, I and a colleague, Hilary Jennings, with whom I work closely, were commissioned by Mission Models Money to undertake primary research for the Sustainability Report in 2 areas. The first was begin to map the growing response to resource scarcity and climate change by individuals and organisations in the UK arts and cultural sector. The second was to assemble information to help deepen our understanding of the practical and behavioural barriers preventing greater breadth and depth of response. Data gathered over a 3-week period formed the basis of a list of nearly 200 initiatives in the arts and cultural sector across the UK and with a small sample from overseas. With more time, this list, quite simply, would have been considerably longer, and a year on, longer still. There was a lot happening. Initiatives spanned the breadth of the sector and ranged in scope and scale from the personal environmental manifesto of a solo artist, Ellie Harrison, through to data collected by the Scottish Arts Council on the consumption of energy amongst Scottish museums, galleries, art centres and festivals. The report recognised that Julie's bicycle was an exemplar driver of change in very practical ways in the sector, and I know that Al Tickell, director of Julie's Bicycle, has been in Australia recently. The final report and analysis and an interactive web map of initiatives can be found on the website www.sustainability.com, but I think you might have got some copies with you now. Above all, a holistic approach to sustainability was recognised, where organisational and deep emotional and personal responses to change were given expression. This is from A Little Patch of Ground by Encounters in Arts Admin's 2 Degrees Festival, looking at art and climate change. The piece involved a local community over 6 months in gallery spaces in urban and rural settings, with both an installation and a performance. The second area of investigation in the study of sustainability was into behavioural change itself, a complex area of study with research conducted across disciplines from social marketing to addictive psychology, positive psychology and anthropology to work out why it is, when the problems we face are so evident, that so many people choose to turn away from them. We conducted interviews and read a wide range of relevant publications. The repeated conclusion was that the pace of change is slow. Our dependence on fossil fuels has taken around 250 years to embed. Deep personal change is most efficacious, demanding as it does engagement with the values that underlie the decisions we make and our sense of who we are. As Claire Cooper, director of MMM, said, by helping to create an environment and state of mind directly conducive to the creation and development of new ideas, the arts challenge the status quo and provide spaces where anything is possible. They can help us build new capabilities and understand how to imagine a different way of being. In the case of A Little Patch of Ground, this found expression in a new creative community of activity, intergenerational and intercultural, looking at what it is like to live now in the context of global challenges. This realm of values, then, was the terrain in which the arts and cultural sector could be seen precisely to be in their element. Pioneering research is emerging around the importance of engaging with our cultural values in order to respond, that was a firework, to what are referred to as bigger-than-self problems. A group of major NGOs, including World Wildlife Fund, Friends of the Earth and Oxfam, under the banner of Common Cause, have produced a groundbreaking report, The Case for Working with Values and Frames. Kieran Mundy, on the role of the arts, which he believes has been to date largely missed. We need to work with deeper frames to elicit different values. The idea of science being value-free isn't working. Science is not in the job of communicating, whereas the arts communicate the things that matter to us, concepts, values, responses on a deeply subconscious level. We need to work in positive frames of sharing. These can be intrinsically motivating, doing things that matter on the inside, that reaffirm who we are. The arts have a central role in helping us to all refocus on aspects of ourselves that value community, connection to others and nature, and move away from the predominantly consumerist and intrinsic worldview that lies at the root of our astonishing predicament. These intrinsic values that can be strengthened include empathy towards those who are facing the effects of environmental crises, concern for future generations, and recognition that human prosperity resides in relationships with one another and critically with the natural world. Humans have made such shifts in societal values before. The abolition of slavery is an extremely excellent example to demonstrate that. It simply became intolerable from a moral point of view. The acceptance of women's suffrage, more recently, and even more recently, the banning of cigarettes in public places, for example, and possibly in Australia, the acceptance of wearing sunscreen. I'm sure there are others. In summary, our sustainability paper identified the key potential for the arts and cultural sector in leading holistic, values-driven, positive and visionary responses, including space for understanding of loss and led by communities of activity. This space for understanding loss is key, for grief can often be a point of transformation, a shared acknowledgement of this moment in planet history, a point of compassion, action and commitment. Previous generations did not know quite what we know now, and future generations will know what we knew. And so to the Happy Museum project. Hilary Jennings and I are currently working as Happiness Associates on this initiative launched this year. It investigates how museums and galleries can be stewards of new civic spaces to help society transition to a high well-being, more sustainable world. A place for encounters where people can value the past, the environment and the future. It's inspired by principles set out in a paper, The Happy Museum, a tale of how it turned out all right, co-written by the New Economics Foundation's Centre for Wellbeing and several leading museum commentators. Its proposition is that museums are well placed to play a part in creating such a future, but grasping that opportunity requires reimagining key aspects of their role in terms of the kinds of experience they provide for their visitors and the way they relate to their collections and their communities. A sense of curatorship becomes one of stewardship. Funded by the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, it tests these principles through 6 commissioned projects. The Manchester Museum explores playful behaviour and looks at whether museums can be physical places for play. Only when we understand the nature of play, says Gordon Burkhard, will we be able to understand how to better shape the destinies of human societies in a mutually dependent world, the future of our species, and perhaps even the fate of the biosphere itself. The Lightbox Surrey looks at mental wellness rather than illness and explores the museum as a place of healing. The Cinema Museum invites local people to explore the museum's international collection of cinema memorabilia and to become community curators. The London Transport Museum, in partnership with homeless charity St Mungo's, creates a social enterprise engaging volunteers on visible, valued museum community projects. This community museum in Godalming connects stewardship of the natural world with stewardship of community, bringing together environmental initiatives active in community building to look at past ways of life and current ideas and hopes for a sustainable way of living, including Transition Town Godalming, allotment holders and a local hydroelectricity project. And finally, Happy from the Beginning integrates practice around well-being into the design and early stages of building the new International Story Museum in Oxford. The Happy Museum was inspired by work undertaken at the Museum of East Anglian Life, where Tony Butler, the Happy Museum project's originator, is director. Neal, as it's known, is now set up as a social enterprise, and it uses its historic buildings, landscape and collections to engage a range of vulnerable people within the community. A Fordson tractor was restored by young people who'd left school with no qualifications. A shepherd's hut is being restored by a work-based learning team. And the museum's success is measured not by queues out of the door, but by the strength of social networks forged from a shared interest in identity and locality. And as Tony himself says, in order to create powerful or meaningful experiences, museums should create a landscape which not only enables participants to engage in the issues of the day, but helps them contribute to society through acts of kindness and altruism. And the key factor about the Happy Museum is the context in which it's working, in that it engages very, very directly with specifically what the economic, energy and environmental issues are. I know many of your own centres and galleries are in rural areas and reliant on volunteer teams. You will empathise with Alison Patterson, who runs the Godalming Museum single-handedly with volunteers, as does the Cinema Museum. We would like to invite you to join the community of Happy Museum practitioners. The learning between the 6 commissions is already considerable, along with the influence on our arts and cultural sector in the UK, and also increasing invitations and interest from abroad. Caroline Lucas, our first Green MP, named the Happy Museum in a speech at our own annual museums conference in Brighton, saying that care of the natural world was a logical extension of taking care of collections. We have a symposium in January 2012 for the Happy Museum project and a larger conference in January 2013. Then maybe it would be possible to include and refer to your own work that you're doing here in New South Wales. I will end on my own experience of working resourcefully and resiliently in a voluntary capacity as a citizen of where I live in South London and as co-chair of Transition Town Tooting, where we've been using art and creativity to engage with these issues at grassroots level. We worked with Project Pacama and Emergency Exit Arts last summer to create a community-wide celebration, the Trash Catchers Carnival. It was commissioned by Tipping Point, who bring together artists and scientists to tackle climate change, and Angharad will tell you more about Tipping Point, I believe. The carnival celebrated taking care of the earth using entirely recycled materials. Over 800 people took part, including local schools, temples, sports clubs, using thousands of plastic bottles and bags, crisp packets, renewable materials collected over a 6-month period. Several structures were over 6 metres high, and on the day, in July, thousands turned out, the sun shone, and local restaurants fed over 1,000 people for free at the end of the event on fish ponds playing fields, and the community was left with a feeling, if we can do that, we can do anything. One participant called it whole joy. He was right. Artists and members of the community had worked together over a year to imagine and create a shared and positive vision of Tooting's sustainable future, and it was kind and kindly, and people behaved very differently towards each other on the day. Very beautiful. The Sankofa bird, which became the symbol of the carnival, a mythical bird flying forward while backward with an egg in its mouth, the egg symbolising the future. It represents the idea that in shaping our collective future, we must also look to and learn from the past. Imagining a future for Tooting got us thinking about the stories of the future in popular culture, where once we were bombarded with futuristic technologies and intergalactic travel like Star Trek, the overwhelming message today seems dominated by apocalyptic or dystopian futures, such as those portrayed in films and books like The Day After Tomorrow and The Road. As a society, can we not harness the power of human imagination and creativity to shape this positive vision of a sustainable future? The Austrian philosopher Ivan Illich was once asked, what is the most powerful way to change society? Is it by revolution, to remove oppressors, or reformation, to make key institutions more dramatic? And he said, it's neither revolution nor reformation. If you wish to change society, you must tell an alternative story. And the most urgent question we must ask today is, what is our story? What story are we offering the next generation and the ones that follow it? Our imaginations hold the key for creating the changes we need. And this is a quote I love of Brian Eno. Humans are capable of a unique trick, creating realities by first imagining them, by experiencing them in their minds. As soon as we sense the possibility of a more desirable world, we begin behaving differently, as though that world is starting to come into existence, as though in our mind's eye we are already there. The dream becomes an invisible force which pulls us forward, and by this process it begins to come true. The act of imagining somehow makes it real, and what is possible in art becomes thinkable in life. So a straightforward part of our work as creative institutions and practitioners is in helping to create collective positive visions of what our workplaces and communities could be. Making this part of our daily practice really does create energy and impetus to move towards a sustainable future. The more people imagining and holding a positive vision and working together, however far apart, the better. Angharad will open up the discussion about your own practices, positive practices in New South Wales, so I shall close now. A talent for speaking differently rather than arguing well is the chief instrument of cultural change. That's Richard Rorty. I trust the days ahead afford you the chance to speak differently with one another, thinking and feeling and acting also in an open and different way, and I look forward to hearing more. We can't afford not to act, and as the great deep ecologist Joanna Macy says, of all the dangers we face, none is as dangerous as the deadening of our response, and she calls this shift to a life-sustaining society and livable world the essential adventure of our times. So individually and collectively, go for it. Thank you.